Hey book lovers, Victoria here and you're watching My Books and Me, and today, as it is Anzac Day coming up this week, I thought I would recommend you guys 4 war-related reads that I think everyone should check out. I will admit 3 of them are not only Australian authors but are more middle grade YA, the other one's poetry, and technically I haven't actually read one of them, but doesn't matter. I definitely own more war-related stories that I do really want to read, and I've also probably got a lot on my to read to buy list. So before I do get into sharing with you these books, please let me know in the comments below some books that you recommend that relate to World War I, World War II, really just any of the wars that have an interesting fictional focus on the war, obviously. And also just if you've read any non-fiction that is really good to do with mainly the First or Second World War, I'd also really love to know. Yeah, so I mean, let's dive in. The first one is A Rose for the Anzac Boys by Jackie French. I've talked about this book quite a lot on my channel. I read this 3 Anzac days ago. 2015 I read it. Or was it 2016? I don't remember. I read it around Anzac Day. I finished it on Anzac Day Eve, and it was so, well, it's a beautiful story, but to actually be sitting in our Memorial Hall on Anzac Day listening to a number of different people speak for our Anzac Day service and have this book in the back of my mind, it was moving and chilling and just, it's amazing. This book also is really great because it focuses on the involvement of women during the First World War. Obviously a lot of fictional stories and even like non-fiction recordings of the war mainly focus on the men, on the soldiers who are fighting. This focuses on how a lot of women were also very closely involved with the grisliness of the front line. And obviously in particular this has a really good focus on nurses and like the danger and the disaster that they were forced into. So we follow our main character Midge, who I'm pretty sure she's I'm pretty sure she's from New Zealand. Her brother's fighting in Gallipoli. She's going to school in England, and her friends decide they want to be part of this war effort, this glorifying thing of war, and they want to do what they want, do their part for their country and their king kind of thing. So they head over to France, and they go over to France and they start a canteen at one of the train stations, and it just happens to be the train station that is like the final stop before the Western Front and the first stop back, obviously. And they think this is a great experience. They meet a whole bunch of soldiers who are going off to fight for the first time, and then they're shocked that one evening a train comes in and unloads a ton of wounded soldiers who are being transported away from the front line because they're too injured, they're going home kind of thing. And they're very surprised to see how volatile war is and everything like that. And it's the first glimpse they sort of get at how terrible war actually is. It's not the glorifying thing that everyone has made it out to be. Midge is soon taken into an ambulance. Midge is then recruited into an ambulance service, which is getting her closer and closer to the front line, and she soon ends up at one of the nursing stations where her aunt is actually situated. And this is when she really gets to see the horror of war. During this entire time, back when they had the canteen, they met a whole bunch of Australian soldiers who were moving about to the next phase or something. I can't really remember how it went. And she kind of hits it off with one of them, and he asks if he can write to her, and so he writes to her, and then he gets injured, and there's just, it all culminates in just this really devastating experience. And it sort of becomes, in the end, no one else can really understand what they've gone through, and they kind of bond over their shared experiences. It is moving, it is beautiful. It made me want to cry. I think I shed a few tears. It's a beautiful book. I really recommend it, especially if you are Australian or New Zealand. Another Jackie French book, this one is actually focusing on World War II, and it's an interesting look at World War II, and I think it's a really interesting and creative take on it. I don't really know. And that is Hitler's Daughter. It's actually the first in kind of a trilogy. The second book is Pennies for Hitler, and then there is another one. It's only just recently come out. This book is essentially a way to introduce children to World War II and to Hitler. And it's actually like really creative. It's not very long. It's about this group of friends who, on a rainy day, waiting for the bus stop, they start to tell stories, and they get one of their friends, Anne, I think it is. She starts telling this story about Hitler's daughter Heidi, and if Hitler had a daughter, and what would happen, what Heidi would be doing while Hitler was off leading the Nazis. And so you have Heidi, so you sort of alternate between the story they're telling and present day stuff, with our main character Mark sort of looking at war a bit differently, because obviously he does know a little bit about Hitler and World War II and what happened to the Jews and everything like that. But this story is giving him, like, this made up story about Heidi is giving him just a bit of an interesting insight into people and things like that. So it's about Heidi, who is obviously Hitler's daughter. She has a birthmark across her face, so like the complete opposite of like his ideal race of people, and she's hidden away. And enjoys kind of a quiet life away from war. And she doesn't realize that Hitler is like this big leader of this really evil group of people, and that have done so much horrific damage to, you know, cultures, to communities, to the world. And it's a really interesting story. I really do recommend it. It's a must read, whether, you know, obviously no one likes Hitler, but I still think this is interesting, an interesting look at what if Hitler had a daughter, what would she be like? What if she didn't know what was actually happening out in the world? What if she was secluded? What if no one knew that Hitler was her father? Kind of thing. It's really interesting, and it's a really worthwhile read. It's only very short. It is obviously targeted more towards children, but still a really great read. The other book is the one that I haven't actually read yet. I talked about it in my recent book haul, but I know it's going to be amazing, and I know it's a book that a lot of people will find interesting. Again, this is for the First World War. It is very much more Australian orientated, and that is The Horses Didn't Come Home by Pamela Rushby. This is about Australia's involvement in the Battle of Beersheba, which was obviously in general an important battle within World War I, but particularly for Australians, it was a battle that was fought on horseback and that Australians won. And it was this great victory for the Allied forces and for Australians. And I've actually seen a documentary. It's called The Australian Wallah. I really recommend watching it. That looks at the Battle of Beersheba and these horses, and that these horses became the soldiers' best friends. And at the end of the war, when the war was over, when armistice was signed, most of the horses didn't come home. Horses, as I said in my haul, horses don't travel well in general. A lot of the horses actually died or were put down on the way over. So coming back at the end of the war, it was just not possible to bring them home along with all of the soldiers they had to bring home as well. So a lot of the horses were set free to roam the deserts. A lot were sadly put down by the soldiers, which was obviously a horrific thing for the soldiers to actually do. They had been this horse had been by their side for the duration of the war, for their duration overseas, and that was how that bond was going to end. This book sounds amazing, and I've heard really, really great things about it, so I do really recommend it. Again, it's by an Australian author. It is more of a middle grade read, I think. It's actually blurbed by Jackie French, a superb story about an extraordinary corner of our past. I think it's going to be a really great read, and I do recommend that everyone pick it up. Again, especially if you're Australian. I feel like obviously a lot of my books are kind of more Australian orientated because I am Australian, but anyone in general should definitely read it. The final book is a poetry book, and it's really, really good. It's not a poetry collection I've read in its entirety, but I have read a number of poems from it, so I do feel like I can recommend it to you guys, and that is Anthem for Doomed Youth by Wilfred Owen. Wilfred Owen was actually a soldier in the First World War, and he wrote a lot of poetry about his experiences in the trenches. Now, it was either that he died before the war ended, just before the war ended, and his diary was found and then published, or he died just after the war ended, and again his diary was published. But his poems are really, really good. It's so great to read, not only about someone's experiences and their thoughts from when they were in the trenches, but to also have them in like a poetry form, which is a lot more, I suppose, a lot more creative, a bit different to read, open to a little bit of interpretation, and just, I don't know, it's really, really good. I actually started with Owen back in high school, which is why I had to buy his collection when I started collecting the Little Black Classics. 3 poems that I really recommend are Anthem for Doomed Youth, Dulce Decorum Est, and Futility. Really good poems. The rest are also really great. I have read quite a few more in here, but they're definitely ones that I remember really well and that are really great. And yeah, it's just, so they are 4 war-related books that I think you guys should check out. Specifically, obviously this coming week around Anzac Day, but just at any time I think it'd be really great if you guys could check them out, especially if you want to get more into reading historic fiction and war type stories. You definitely don't have to have a great interest in the wars or great knowledge of the wars to really appreciate them. They're definitely for the average reader who maybe not necessarily be totally in to war fiction or know much about any of the wars. You don't really get like great in-depth about like actual fighting and things like that. It's more about the people behind the fighting and things like that. Really, really good. As I said at the start, please let me know in the comments below some war-related stories that you guys have read that you want to recommend to me, because I'd love to check them out. I mean, I have a ton of books to read, but I definitely will add them to my to-read list because I always really like to read a war story around Anzac Day. I think it's the perfect time to read them, really. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I actually uploaded a video last week on Wednesday on my other channel, Just Me Victoria, talking about 5 war films that I really enjoyed that you guys should check out if you haven't already. And tomorrow on that channel I also have a really beautiful video going up. I worked hard on it, I'm really proud of it, so please check that out. Other than that, I'll see you guys next week with another video. Bye!